When the Reapers began to enter the galaxy, they first did so through the distant systems of the Kite's Nest cluster. Starting in the Valar system, they rapidly crossed the distance to the Batarian home system. The isolated nature of the Batarian hegemony meant that the Reapers were able to hide their presence from the wider galaxy aside from the communication blackouts. Although a handful of Reaper destroyers were taken down over certain worlds, the Batarians were crushed, made all the easier through the extensive spread of indoctrination through the Leviathan of Dis, a Reaper corpse that the hegemony had seized decades prior, which led to most of Karsharn's planetary defences being shut down by their own forces, along with general disarray spreading as ships fired upon one another. With the few remaining ships of the Batarian fleet forced to flee, many of their worlds became the first to fuel the Reapers' efforts, while others had to sit by in deafening silence, waiting for the Reapers to arrive at their doorstep. The majority of Batarians that escaped ended up in Systems Alliance territories, such as the Exodus cluster, before later moving on to the Citadel. The sheer amount of Batarians passing through the mass relays connecting Hegemony and Alliance space was so great and unexpected that Alliance ships guarding the relays thought the Batarians had started their own war with humanity. Yet, they merely heralded the imminent Reaper expansion. Based on the layout of the mass relay network, the Reapers' next stop was humanity. Ignoring all but the most important worlds, the Reapers headed straight for Earth and the Sol system. At Arcturus Station, Hackett and the 2nd, 3rd and 5th Alliance fleets, only one of which had been able to move to an optimal position for long-range engagements, fought only a dozen capital ship-sized Reapers and an unknown amount of Reaper destroyers, while the majority of the Reaper force continued to Earth. The 1st Fleet had been positioned on the Sol side of the connecting mass relay, but suffered heavy losses and barely slowed down the Reapers. At Earth itself, even as some claimed that the massive fleet moving towards the planet wasn't cause for concern, the Reapers descended into the atmosphere, effortlessly pushing past the defensive 4th Fleet and believed to be led by Harbinger itself. Planet-side, the Reapers focused on immobilizing humanity rather than outright destruction, attempting to keep them contained in urban centres to make the creation of the new Reaper more efficient, continuing this approach throughout their occupation. Yet this still saw catastrophic levels of destruction, with the casualty rate already reaching the multi-million range by the end of the first week of the battle. Despite delivering crushing blows to humanity at Earth and Arcturus Station, though, 3 key human figures were able to survive the Reaper onslaught. Firstly, Shepard and several others were able to escape Earth on board the Norman DSR-2. Secondly, Admiral Anderson was able to evade Reaper forces for long enough to meet up with and go on to lead resistance forces, initially consisting of other Systems Alliance personnel trapped on Earth, which would go on to become one of the most formidable forces on Reaper-occupied planets. And thirdly, Admiral Hackett was able to withdraw fleets from the Arcturus battle, and would become the de facto leader of the Systems Alliance Navy, with his first action after the retreat being to order Shepard to Mars to investigate its status amid the chaos. However, these advantages would only begin to become clear as the wider fight against the Reapers continued, whereas the losses to humanity were felt immediately. They were still able to put up a fight, unlike the Batarians, but it was clear that their forces were a shadow of what they once were. At Arcturus, for example, the Alliance 2nd Fleet had been ordered to cover the retreat of the other 2 fleets, and was destroyed down to the last ship. On Mars, Shepard, James Vega and Caden Alenko discovered the site had been taken over by Cerberus, with its forces seeming to be nearing the end of the initial battle to claim it and rounding up or chasing the stragglers. Once the trio entered the site, they discovered that one of these stragglers was Liara, who narrowly escaped a pair of Cerberus troopers before informing her old friends of her discoveries and the reason behind the Cerberus presence. A potential way to stop the Reapers had been discovered in the archives. Sending Vega back to the shuttle as a precaution, Shepard headed towards the facility's central chamber, fighting Cerberus at every step. On her way, she discovered Cerberus's method of entry, what seems to be a lone operative undercover as a scientist, along with the horrific effects of the implants used on their soldiers, leaving them one step away from husks. Once at the centre of the Prothean archive, Shepard was contacted by the Elusive Man, who proclaimed his plans to use the data stored to take control of the Reapers, which acted as a distraction for the operative to take the necessary intel, only for it to be chased down by Shepard. The ensuing chase and subsequent destruction of its escape craft revealed that it was an advanced form of mech, rather than a living human, which managed to severely wound the Vermeer survivor before Shepard permanently disabled it. With Reapers entering the atmosphere though, Shepard and the crew were forced to flee from the entire Sol system and head for the Citadel, briefing Hackett on the situation as they did so. Of the other Alliance forces that were able to escape the Reapers, half of the First Fleet had been wiped out before the retreat was given, and a tenth of its remaining ships had to be sacrificed to cover its retreat. Several lone capital ships of varying types would also be found scattered across the galaxy behind enemy lines and incorporated into the three main surviving fleets to rebuild their numbers. Despite their starting point, Reaper forces began to be sighted at various worlds across the outskirts of the galaxy, suggesting that they may have manoeuvred to encircle it while still in dark space in order to throw the various species off balance. On Ilium, for example, the Reapers found their efforts stalled when the planet's defenders focused on the Reapers' weaker, automated ships which carried the various amount of husked forms needed to sustain the planetary invasion, which forced the Reapers to redirect and reprioritise their own forces, but this would only delay the inevitable for the Asari world. Around the same time, the Taurians were beginning to feel the wrath of the Reapers. Defeated at their colony world of Tatras, the Taurians witnessed their counterattack force wiped out mere moments after the mass relay jump, and all other attempts to retake the planet failed. This then forced them onto the back foot much faster than all but a few thought possible, as they retreated to defend Palaven. With little time to prepare a defence, Taurian fleets flocked to their homeworld, with only a pair of carrier ships being stationed near the mass relay. Once the Reapers emerged, these two ships deployed every drone and unmanned starfighter they held to record as much data about their capabilities as possible before being wiped out. Using this to further plan their side of the battle, Taurian dreadnoughts commenced FTL jumps to land themselves between Reaper formations, where the latter's capabilities were limited by their weaknesses, only for Reaper destroyers to traverse the same distance to the orbit of Palaven as a counter, leaving the Taurians scrambling back to their homeworld and leaving the mass relay clear for Reaper reinforcements, before the Taurians eventually retreated to regroup. By the time the Normandy arrived at the Citadel, the other Council species were already looking for excuses to abandon Earth to its fate, stating the need to defend their own territories even when presented with the plans recovered from Mars. Behind closed doors, though, the Taurian councillor Sparatus, once the most sceptical about the Reaper threat, approached Shepard for assistance recovering Taurian Primarch Fedorian from one of Palaven's moons, a mission she reluctantly accepted. According to reports Udina had received, the Reapers had already destroyed all long-range communications on Earth, aside from quantum entanglement communicators, such as the one aboard the Normandy SR-2. Once word of the Reapers had reached the Citadel, the Ralloi, the newest species to join the galactic community, immediately abandoned the Citadel and destroyed any form of technology that would indicate they were a spacefaring species to try hiding from the Reapers. Whether this worked or if it merely made them an easier target became unknown to the rest of the galaxy as the war progressed. By the time that the Normandy arrived at Menet, the battles in the system had been ongoing for at least 2 days, and the Taurian navy was in the process of attempting to reclaim orbital supremacy of their own homeworld, only for their formations to be ripped apart by the Reapers. Once groundside, Shepard's mission became more complicated as the Taurians that she had been sent to find had fallen to the Reapers. Not only that, but the wider losses had left the otherwise extremely clear and straightforward lines of succession in shreds. Once communications to Palaven had been re-established, it was discovered that the next to take the position of Primarch was one of the officers fighting on Menet. Having reunited with Shepard, Garrus led her to the last location of Victus, recounting the state of the Taurians' war on the way, which was seeing similar levels of casualties as Earth was, as the Reapers had bombarded vast swaths of Palaven to crush resistance. Meanwhile on the Normandy, Edie had attempted to continue the search for the information taken by the mech on Mars, with the process causing malfunctions to spread to other areas of the ship, until she was able to destroy the hostile AI and take over control of the mech. Upon finding Victus, Shepard and Garrus convinced him to leave the immediate fight to lead his people, although on the condition to try bringing the Krogan into the war. From Victus's perspective, it was the only way to have a chance at salvaging the situation on Palaven, even if only on the ground. Unlike with Karshan and Earth, the fight was merely viewed as having moved to groundside instead of being a complete fool. As the vast majority of Taurians were well versed in the life of a soldier, due to the hierarchy structure, although fighting at a severe disadvantage since the Reapers had reportedly begun to occupy the majority of the planet. Meanwhile, several other planets in the cluster were faced with stalemates, being held by forces that could have otherwise been used to defend Palaven while facing smaller-scale Reaper attacks. In Asari space, the Reapers began to be sighted in the Selene Nebula and Nimbus cluster, more locations on the border of the galaxy. Due to the initial tactic of performing hit-and-runs against Reaper forces, Asari fleets were able to limit their losses, but were in even less of a position to stop the Reapers advancing through their territories, with this approach only acting as a diversion for the Reapers when they eventually reached Thessia. With the war summit delayed, Shepard set about investigating a series of Cerberus incursions. The largest scale of these was the occupation of Eden Prime, which Cerberus had launched around the same time the Reapers began to expand beyond the Batarian space. Having subdued its defenders and shipping most of its combat-fit inhabitants to be integrated into Cerberus's forces, only a small-scale resistance was able to oppose them as they focused their efforts around a new Prothean artifact. By the time Shepard and Liara made their investigation, they discovered that it wasn't simply an artifact, but an occupied and operational Prothean stasis pod. With the Prothean cipher, Shepard was able to discover how to release the Prothean from the stasis pod. A commander of the Prothean Empire named Javik, the occupant was unaware of anything about the Crucible aside from the fact that his species' attempts to complete it had failed, but with more experience fighting Reapers than even Shepard, he still committed himself to the fight and to the Normandy's crew. Along with this, Cerberus intel discovered by Shepard was passed to Eden Prime's resistance movement using Liara's Shadow Broker resources, and they were able to drive Cerberus into retreat. Unfortunately, the victories at Eden Prime were isolated ones compared to the wider state of the conflict, as the Systems Alliance was forced to withdraw from system after system, and in some cases entire clusters, with the Hades Gamma cluster becoming a staging point for further Reaper attacks. Aside from rare examples like the colony of Ukbar, which was fully evacuated in under an hour with the aid of only a single Systems Alliance cruiser, the Reapers were beginning to take over colonies faster than they could be evacuated. Whether to even stay and attempt to hold colonies in the Exodus cluster quickly became a debate, despite a comparatively small Reaper presence compared to other worlds, as Hackett had ordered the 6th Fleet, one of the fleets active in the cluster, to avoid contact with Reaper forces at all costs as a reserve force, as they retreated from Terra Nova and surrounding planets. In the nearby Petra Nebula, Shepard investigated a distress call answered by a signal similar to the one that she had followed into a trap aboard a collector cruiser. Encountering Cerberus during a raid on the Systems Alliance site Grissom Academy, aiding Kaylee Sanders and Jack, an old friend of Anderson and Shepard respectively, the Normandy's crew were able to rescue the biotics of the Ascension Project, who would go on to provide biotic support for troops fighting in some of the toughest battles against the Reapers. Over in the Terminus systems, Shepard raided a Cerberus lab on Sanctum with the objective of retrieving small-scale Reaper tech, along with finding personnel logs referring to the processing that Cerberus troops were forced through. After Shepard left the planet, Hackett would keep up the pressure against the Cerberus site as one of many locations targeted by newly emerging N7 teams. Although only a few were official N7s like Shepard, these squads acted as multi-species teams that conducted rapid missions against Cerberus and Reaper forces, and would see some of the most common successes throughout the Reaper War, consisting both of the best and the unconventional. With these missions complete though, Shepard now had to turn her attention to playing diplomat.